which is, I mean, really honestly, this is, you're the kenraaliharjoitus. What's that in English? I can never remember. You're the dress rehearsal for this talk that I'll be giving in a couple of weeks at the OpenJS World in Austin, and a couple of weeks after that in React Norway. So thank you, and you're welcome. And hi, I'm Eemeli. I'm a weird person in that I've gotten, interested in doing localization stuff, especially JavaScript localization stuff. And it turns out that once you get, deep down into localization, deep enough into it, there aren't that many other people around doing stuff. I was doing this for fun up to about a year ago. Then I'm now, since then, working for Mozilla, doing this also still for fun, but also getting paid directly for it, which is nice. So effectively, I'm telling you here a story of what I've been working on recently and what it might all be leading up to or working towards. So this is literally cutting-edge stuff because I've needed to delay actually putting together this presentation in order to figure out where we are with certain work groups where we're working on this right now. But yeah. Localization is in Finland, it's a relatively common topic because we happen to be a country where we speak Finnish and Swedish and everything is still done in English. And this means that there are very few projects that any of us do that are any sort of front-end things that don't end up being localized in one way or another. Some, yeah, but sure. So maybe we do it a little bit better here. Maybe this is a part of why I got interested in this in the first place. But in general, localization is still mostly an afterthought in far too many different situations. And we have a number of different solutions for it. There's no like 1D thing that solves all the problems. But hopefully we're getting a little bit better at this. And we're getting to also being able to have localization take into account the fact that we are working in contexts like React, for instance, where it's not really just a matter of presenting strings of text to users. It's about presenting content that may have markup and other things attached to it, and work from there. And finally, the last bullet point is not for you guys, because we know in Finland the localization matters for us because everything ends up needing to get localized. But in the general US and British markets in particular, it's quite easy to presume that everyone speaks English after all. Why should we, need to care? So all of this could be better. All of this could be like much, much better. We really need to work at the standards, the specification level to make things more easily localizable, using common tools, common syntaxes, specifications, and we need to have tools that make this all possible and make it possible to work within a context like React really fluidly well, rather than just needing to have strings coming in and out. And finally, this is maybe a little bit different, but honestly for me it's quite important, is that we ought to recognize that localization is a part of making our content accessible and inclusive to a larger share of the audience, of any audience. But yeah, so really, I've talked a bunch, I think previously even here at React Helsinki, about localization. And I'm not going to go into all of the weird things, how pluralization works at all here. Because here I'm talking about how do you localize something like a phrase at the top, Helsinki is the capital of Finland, where you happen to include something more complicated like HTML or a React component or anything, where you have a link that you need to use. And then you need to translate this into, for example, Finnish. Helsinki on Suomen pääkaupunki. And I'm not going to even try the Swedish because, I don't, it would be bad. The point here is that this is the sort of thing that is actually, there is no one right answer to solving this problem. How do you do this localization work? There are some solutions, but they could be better. So this is really what I'm talking about here. And to jump forwards, really the solution that I'm trying to help make possible is the kind of solution where we can have something like an HTML page as an end result that includes a link, like we have links for style sheets, for instance, where we say, here, use this source for the localization. And then when we do have in the content, here the English language message is included there in the span as an example. But that wouldn't even be necessary in all cases. We can have the content and we can identify that, hang on, there's an, identify Helsinki here. And then we can end up looking up in the linked resource, what is this content and how do we show it in Finnish, for instance. So specifically here, the new things that aren't there really yet is this link with the rel value of localization. That is not a thing yet, but working on it. It's like with style sheets. It creates a link to another external file that is required for rendering the whole page eventually. Then there's the connection between having an localization identifier. L10N is short for localization because it's got like 10 letters and starts with an L. And internationalization is I18N because, of course, we are trying to make communication simple and everyone understands things because that's what it's all about. Yeah, so we need this kind of linkage to be possible. And then a particular thing that's mentioned here, the translate attribute is actually already a thing in HTML. It's not used that much when you're looking at a page, but when it's processed by certain tooling, that's handled. But the all value there would be a new value added to HTML here. And that's linking up with when we are localizing a message, we need to be certain about what's the sort of content that we're okay with coming from the external message resource. And here, the href in particular would be used to replace the English language link with a Finnish language link, for instance. So yeah. So to me, the obvious questions to ask from here are, what's the format of this message format file? Is this going to work in all browsers? And how do I, use this ever in my React app? Okay, this is maybe going to be a little bit of a Socratic dialogue where I'm going to presume you're going to have questions and then I'm going to answer them. I'm kind of just honestly just hoping you have these questions, but bear with me, hopefully. So really, I mean, the answer to all of these questions is standardize all the things so they're all like shared by everyone. I'm very proud of that image. So specifically for messages and the message resource format, under the Unicode Consortium's Common Language Data Repository technical committee, there's the message format working group, which is a subcommittee of the CLDRTC, where we're working on the message format 2 specification. There is an existing thing called ICU message format. Hand up if you've ever heard of this. That's about as much. That was like 4 almost raised hands. About as much as I would expect. We're working on the next version of it, which is going to be better in many ways. On the browsers and HTML side of things, we're building towards working on a DOM localization spec. That is not yet being actively worked on by any working group. That's going to be upcoming in W3C and or WhatWeG, which end up defining HTML and things around it. And in JavaScript, the thing I picked for the actual topic here, the Intl.MessageFormat specification is currently at stage 1, and once we get stuff in the Unicode to a better state, we can hopefully get the JavaScript spec to get to stage 2 and onwards from there. But yeah, this is my life. So we're not really just making a bright new future for everyone. We're also concerned about how do we make it so that all the existing systems and applications are portable forwards to this bright new future. And the key thing that we can sell here is that we can make stuff faster and consume fewer bytes. So this is part of this is that you've got possibly in applications that you're already maintaining, you've got messages in various sorts of formats and resource files and so on, we'll be able to provide tooling for parsing all of those into a message format to data model, not just the syntax, but a data model that can then be used in all of that can benefit from using a shared runtime across all platforms. So effectively, there are many parts that you currently need to deploy when you have a properly localized anything that you're deploying on the web that that require parsing, require other processing. We'll be able to get the browsers themselves to do quite a bit of that work. And really, we're working on getting that added not just to the DOM, but also to JavaScript specification itself. The Intl.MessageFormat is an expansion. Okay, so JavaScript itself is defined by ECMA 262, which is a specification under the ECMA organization, and which has TC39, and that's ECMA 262 is what TG1 there works on, and ECMA 402 is a slightly separate part. That defines the Intl object in JavaScript. How many of you have ever heard or used anything in the Intl object? That's more. That's not like everyone, but Intl has all sorts of cool things in it, like currently even like widely available. Number format might be the nicest, the most common thing. You can feed it, you can set it up to format numbers as you want them, and you can then have it format that number in an appropriate way using however the spaces and the commas and the periods, for instance, need to work for the locale for which you're formatting. We're trying to build the same sort of thing, but for messages rather than the specific formatters that Intl currently uses. One cool part of this is that we're going to end up needing to have a parser for our format in JavaScript. And it's literally the first time we're doing anything like this in JavaScript since JSON.parse. And that's kind of cool. But yeah, also good to note, because we're doing this in Unicode, one of the things that Unicode provides is ICU as a library. ICU is short for Internationalization Components for Unicode. The acronyms changed what the words were, but the meaning is still that it's this shared library that's actually used currently by pretty much all of the browsers and all of the operating systems to do all of the internals for what they're doing for formatting, which is this weird situation where we have everyone working together on a shared base and then just providing possibly different interfaces to it. And this is why also we're doing a lot of this work in Unicode, because there, if we solve it in Unicode, we end up providing a solution for all platforms in one go. It's just sometimes challenging. Yeah, getting back to what I was talking about near at the beginning. So one of the big things that we're working with this whole project is localizing not just individual strings, but localizing whole elements and complex structures. And this this is leading up to being able to localize something like entire React components or elements in the DOM or other parts. And it also allows us not just be able to represent this in the runtime to make it all format nicely for the page, but a really important part of all of this is the translators or localizers who do this work, who need to end up getting to see the string or the representation of your message, and then be able to work from there to make it make sense in their own language. And these people are not programmers. They sometimes are, but mostly we're talking about people who know languages, human languages, as opposed to knowing computer languages. And this means that there's a lot of thought that needs to go into how do we really represent these complex structures in a way that makes them easy to represent for someone who's, in the end, really just going to get a string and figure out, okay, this is what that thing means in English. It's always in English to start with. Okay, not always, but it's like nearly always in English to start with. And this is what it is in my own language. And this is surprisingly difficult. And it's surprisingly easy to start making wrong assumptions at the start as a programmer, as a developer, about how people think about messages and end up causing problems for oneself later. So we want to make it easy to make the right choices to start with. We want to make it easy to get to the right results without really even trying, by making the right path be also the easy path. I'm a big believer in all plans needing to, be sufficiently big that there's a conquer the world step at the end of it, or at least at one stage. So the conquer the world bit of this whole thing I'm working on is that we're going to do the same thing to web development that CSS did about 30 years ago, but for content instead of styling. Which, might happen. I don't know. I'm going to try. We'll see how it goes. And that's going to be an interesting, hopefully a very interesting world for us to be able to provide. It doesn't take away from anything that you can already do now, but it opens up new possibilities to hopefully do things more easily in the future. And that should make it easier for people working on the front end to incur effectively less tech debt, because they make choices and they don't necessarily know all the consequences of their choices. Because localization is really complicated. So you might be reasonably, asking how much bullshit am I talking, right now? And the honest answer is I hope not much. And fundamentally, a big part of why I can say this is that we're already doing this. This is already how at Mozilla, how, for instance, Firefox, the browser itself, is localized. This is already a reality. We're not using the message format 2 stuff yet. We're using Fluent, which is an evolution, which is a standard and a language and an existing thing, but it's not Unicode. It's not used by absolutely everyone. And we are working on aiming to get a tech preview of message format 2, the message formatting level of things, including in ICU 72, ICU, the library I mentioned. And that's going to be coming out in the fall. And as mentioned, working on adding this to JavaScript itself, the language, and that's currently at stage 1. But yeah, and all of this is, of course, publicly available on the internet, or more like mostly on GitHub, because everything's on GitHub. Bunch of links there. I'll share the presentation link later, and I'm very happy to take any questions if you have them. And thank you for listening for me, at least thus far.
Hey. Yeah, okay, that was loud. So I'm gonna say that I'm really excited about this, because coming from like a kind of different native language myself, and living here as, somebody who's a little bit, statistically out of the norm, because I reach out for English on literally every Finnish website. I'm really excited about this. I have 3 questions, if you don't mind. One is, like, the most exciting one is, how would this, how would you imagine this would integrate with accessibility in future, like audio messages and all that? Is there any plans for that?
So a large part of if we look at this sort of a structure of representing content, a large part of what you can see, for instance, here is that we are overlaying content on the HTML structure of a document. But that is not the only dimension in which we can overlay content, but it can be all sorts of more accessibility-centered aspects as well that can be included here. A lot of the work here is more about not necessarily enhancing accessibility, but keeping in mind the concerns about accessibility and being sure not to make any mistakes that we might to make it more difficult, if that answers the question.
Yeah, because it does, yeah. So the second question is, since you have a little more of inside knowledge from how the parser would look like later on, my experience from localization and web comes from the fact that you have to provide key value JSONs, and there's a lot of problem because you can't really compose messages or reuse the phrases and all that. There's like plural and singular cases and all that. There's like a lot of problems there.
There's a lot.
How would you imagine the parser would look like? Would it like tokenize the way that the language works so that we provide the translation for those tokens, or it's literally going to be a key value message format?
At the level of where we're figuring out things currently for the message format part of all of this, it would be this level of key value, where the value would include some syntax that would then be able to represent elements, represent other things. It would also include ways of building in selectors, for example, for plural cases or other matters like this. It is entirely possible, and some tools already currently exist for being able to extract the text content from any application that you're working with, and then be able to feed it into an external localization file. So, but that is we're not covering that part of the workflow really here, because that is so specific to the whether you're using React or Vue or plain JavaScript and HTML or some other system. So we can't solve all those problems right away.
The challenges I was specifically, thinking about was that like some languages like French have probably gender for even things.
Yes.
And like, I don't know, like English doesn't. So we refer to everything as it. So I was kind of like interested to know how they're going to solve these sort of challenges.
I could give about as long a presentation as we have on just that topic. Trust me, no. We hopefully are working on having really good solutions for that, actually better than the current existing state of the art. It's challenging, and it's also challenging because we need to figure out ways of having a developer who thinks in English be ready to craft a message that can be given to a translator to French who is then able to do that localization, because that too is tricky.
Got it. And sorry, I'm taking too long here. Third question is, since the parser will kind of parse the context of the text, it's message format, so I suppose it's generic. Would it deprecate the API for, number format or date and time format?
No, it would be entirely building up on top of those. So it would be, so you would be able to have define in a message that, this value that you're going to get in, it's a number, and apply these options to it. But the possible options would be the number format options, for instance, rather than,
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was really interesting. What I'm wondering is that, do we end up in a situation where the message format files need to be sort of really intertwined with the structure of the DOM? Well, from this example that's on the screen right now, we can see that the link that is on the Helsinki localization ID is very tied to how the DOM is laid out in the original HTML. So is this a foreseen problem?
I think it's a little bit, to a certain extent, an unavoidable problem, because if we have content like we have here, of having originally a sentence that includes a link as a part of it, in order to be able to represent that in a different language, we end up needing to represent different parts of it. The message format itself does not tie these things together, absolutely, but it does create a connection a little bit. But it is unavoidable when we're talking about translating complex content effectively.
Yeah, so I guess my question really is that, if our MF file were to become obsolete in terms of the structure in the DOM, is that a part of the parser to understand, or part of our application code to understand that these are...
I think effectively there you're talking if the source of a message changes from the original English or other representation, what happens then? Message format itself does not provide an answer to this specific question, because that ends up being highly interrelated with how exactly you're doing translation and how the workflows connect you to whoever or whatever is providing the translation for you, and how does it deal with changes of the source. This is fundamentally a really challenging problem, and it's challenging when you consider different degrees of change. For instance, if somebody corrects a typo in the original, how do you detect that this is possibly not a change that needs to be sent to all of the 150 languages that you support? And everyone needs to realize that was just a typo in the original. Just click and, it's fine. And oh yeah, because we're an external service, you're going to get charged some amount of money for every single one of these actions that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Getting all of that to work is an interesting question. We're not trying to solve it for everyone. We're hoping to make it possible for good solutions to come up, also by helping to focus the industry to work around a standard specification in a language which should enable this. It's not easy.
Thanks.
One more question if anybody has.
Right. So it was really interesting. I work a lot with languages as well, and I know how chaotic and unpredictable they are, and they can cause chaos that you can't really predict. So do you have some sort of fun story for a language or some sort of thing that was absolutely unexpected during the development of this project?
Not specifically this. The first thing that comes to mind is from work that was done on a preceding file format that we used for pluralization between different languages, that ended up having the values being stored in a .properties file format. And they're using, for plural strings, using a semicolon as a separator. And semicolons are kind of relatively rare, except in Greek. Yeah, they're effective. The details don't matter. It's what you refer to as the chaotic aspect here of any little detail that you can think of, how it might work. Your assumptions about that are going to be based in the language that you think in and the languages that you speak, and there will be languages. Welsh in particular is a really good example for all sorts of rules, and plenty of others that break those assumptions. And it's also interesting to figure out that not always is the source language English, and when the source language, a colleague of mine, for instance, comes from working more for a Japanese company earlier, doing translation from Japanese to English. And he tells stories of needing to repeatedly go back to developers about, we need to make this message pluralizable, because in Japanese you don't have a difference in saying one item, two items. It's the same construction. So there are fundamental assumptions that people continuously make about how languages work that end up not being true. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.